Today I'm going to explain three fallacies of language, also referred to as fallacies of ambiguity. The fallacy of equivocation, the fallacy of composition, and the fallacy of division. But there's many ways that language affects the validity of an argument over and above these fallacies. It can affect the soundness, language can affect the soundness and the clarity of an argument. Let's start out by distinguishing a vague word and an ambiguous word. A vague word has almost no meaning. For example, he's a nice guy. Well, what does nice mean? Um, Courteous, kind, generous, pleasant. It has almost no meaning, and it includes just about everybody except for sociopaths. Contrast that with an ambiguous word. An ambiguous word has several or few precise meanings. For example, the word democracy, that's oftentimes defined as a system of representative government, but it's also used to refer to a system in which people have rights. So we've got two different definitions of democracy. So it's always a good idea to define your terms when they're vague or ambiguous. Your best option is to give an analytic definition. An analytic definition gives you the essential characteristics of a term, the necessary characteristics of a term. It's not metaphorical. For example, the analytic definition of a gentleman is someone who is honorable. But the following definition, the metaphorical definition, for that reason, is not a good definition. A gentleman is someone who keeps the lights out when he's in bed with somebody. Okay, and a good definition is not negative. For example, the definition of cruel, not humane. And also, of course, you don't want to use the term you're defining in your definition. For example, definition of student of life. You wouldn't want to say it's a student who studies life. There's a special type of definition that I'm going to talk about, and that's called a stipulative definition. So if you understand what the word stipulate means, you'll understand what stipulative means. If I say, I'm going to stipulate that you do the homework, it's pretty much saying, I'm saying that you must do it. Now, when are stipulative definitions, your own made up definition, when are they useful? They're useful in semantic disputes. A semantic dispute is an argument over the meaning of a term, a meaning of a key word in your argument. And it can't be resolved by adding facts. So, for example, let's say you're in a semantic dispute about whether former President Barack Obama is really black. Okay, so if you have a biological definition, you would say, based on his genetics, his ancestors, you would say Obama is really black because he's got a black parent from Africa. But if you have a political definition of black, you stipulate what you think it means to be black. Here, I'm accessing the work of Cornel West, who said to be black is to be involved in a political struggle against oppression. So you've experienced oppression and you're involved in a political struggle against oppression. So somebody might say, well, Obama's not really black because he didn't do much to improve the state of affairs for black people. Similarly, if you had an argument about whether Hillary Clinton is a feminist, If you're a liberal feminist, which is a feminist that's concerned about equality, you'd say, yes, she's a feminist because she was fighting for equal rights and opportunities for women. But if you're a cultural feminist who claims that there are certain positive features of femininity that society should incorporate, you could say, no, she's not really a feminist because she's a pro military solution uh, policy person. Okay, so that's the first interesting way in which language affects argument, because some arguments are just about the meaning of an important term. A second way in which language can affect argument is through the use of sexist language, which embodies certain assumptions about women or about femininity. For example, the fact that we distinguish in the US in an introduction of a woman compared to an introduction to a man. I would like you to meet Miss Kelly, or I would like to meet you to meet Mrs. Kelly. Well, why distinguish between those two statuses based on whether a woman is married or not? That's sexist. We have an expression that people use at big events called, it's to introduce an event, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Barnum and Bailey Circus. Well, on the face of it, that's not sexist because you're saying ladies and you're saying gentlemen. But as I indicated before, a gentleman is someone who is an honorable person, whereas we have some distinctive assumptions about femininity that applies to being ladylike. For example, be quiet. Don't be noticed that much. Don't take up a lot of space where there's seating. Don't walk big. Keep your legs closed when you're sitting down. And all these imply special constraints on women based on assumptions about femininity. Another obvious form of sexist language is when women or females are referred to in terms of animals. So consider the type of traits that the following animals have when women are labeled as, for example, chicks. And I use that word chick. A chick is vulnerable, soft, and fuzzy, not really very threatening. Compare that to when people call someone a bitch. Well, a female bitch who has puppies is very aggressive and quite dangerous to people that are coming close. Um, so aggressive, risky, fearful. Okay, what about the word fox? When somebody say, wow, she's foxy. A fox is a sly, cunning animal. And when you call women foxy, you're attributing them certain characteristics of foxes. Okay, another way arguments are affected by language is when we use euphemisms. Euphemisms are words that cover over, obfuscate an unpleasant situation or an unpleasant reality. So, some of the euphemisms for death include passing over or going to the other side or expired. And these suggest it's a much more pleasant reality than what we attribute to a person in a state of dying. Okay, what about the words that we use for having sex that don't involve uh, intimate situations between people? Make love. And I saw in the past that Eskimos um, in Alaska or other parts of North America call having sex with their wife laughing with them. What about old age? The golden years? Senior citizens? These words cover up the fact that elderly people in our society may not be doing as well as believed in terms of a livable life, shelter, medicine, food. And then if you go into a public venue, a restaurant or whatever, and ask, where is the toilet? you're much more likely to say, "Where's the bathroom?" Although you're not going to take a bath. "Where's the ladies' room?" And you're not going to go in there to do something ladylike. Or in the past, the powder room, although very few people went in there to, use powder. Slang are words that come from a specific subculture that has a specific worldview embedded in it. Back in the day, the word cool was used in possibly a different sense than it's used today. And it implied to be cool was a good thing, but being cool implied being icy or detached. The word used now for a friend, my homie, has a different connotation, a different suggested meaning than when you call somebody my bestie or my friend. It's somebody that you have loyalty possibly until death. Okay, what about when marijuana is called grass or weed? That makes it seem like it's an innocuous, harmless substance when it's actually a mind altering drug. What about the word woke? It doesn't just mean awake, it refers to something that's important, which awake is kind of taking it for granted that you need to be awake to have consciousness. But woke, I think, means someone that's aware of political and social realities. Finally, I want to talk about a type of language that originally was defined as having a built-in contradiction, two ideas that both can't be true, and today is often described as euphemistic or obscure. Okay, so some of the words that have been used by the American military um, that are examples of doublespeak that seem to imply something that's not a terrible situation when it really is. So, collateral damage in the military doesn't just mean, somebody's car has a little extra damage besides the main damage. It's actually referring to the death of civilians. Friendly fire does not mean, a fireplace, a bottle of Lambrusco, and chestnuts roasting. It means somebody has been hit by somebody on their own side. Ordnance refers to, in the military, bombs. And an interesting example of a word that was used in colonial days in the US when dealing with the native populations in Indian country, in Indian or Indian country, has been used by the military to refer to being in enemy's territory. An example from medicine, death in a hospital has been referred to as negative patient care outcomes. Getting fired by a corporation has been described as dehired. And of course, expressions like non-political expressions like genuine imitation leather can qualify as doublespeak. Or when somebody says, I misspoke, and what they really mean is they lied. Covers that up. So I'm going to discuss three fallacies from the book, chapter 3 of the Engel book, Fallacies of Ambiguity. First, the fallacy of equivocation. The fallacy of equivocation occurs when, in an argument, a word means one thing in the premises and another thing in the conclusion. This is also the structure of an argument that contains equivocation. The premises have meaning one, the conclusion has meaning two. My example on your handout. I've been late to work several times this week, and I had to go through a red light because I was determined to get to work on time today. Premise number two, people can't be blamed for what they were determined to do. Conclusion, therefore, I'm not to blame for the accident resulting from my going through the red light. So this argument is fallacious because determined in the first premise means I was highly motivated to get there on time. Whereas the word determined in the second premise is a uh, either you could call it a scientific term or a philosophical term, but it means that what has happened was a result of causes that once these causes occurred, the effect was necessitated. Doesn't have anything to do with motivation. When you recognize an argument that has this particular fallacy, the pattern of critical reasoning I want you to use is to define both of the terms. It doesn't have to be a perfect definition from a dictionary or Wikipedia. It could just be your common sense, ordinary language definitions of these terms, which I just provided. In addition, don't think that when there's an ambiguous term in an argument that is unclear or a word that you don't know what it means, that's not the fallacy of equivocation. That's a problem with language, but it doesn't have the structure of an argument that has the fallacy because a key word doesn't change meanings. The fallacy of composition, the second fallacy I want to talk about, is often referred to, if you look it up online, it might say the fallacy of composition is going from parts to whole. Your premises says something about the parts of a whole or members of a group, and then your conclusion says something about the whole group or the whole thing. That definition is insufficient because the fallacy of composition is a fallacy of language. And the reason why an argument contains a fallacy of composition is because in the premises, something's being said about the parts or the members of a group using one standard, but the conclusion says something about the whole group or the whole thing and using a different standard or norm. My example, Aquinas's women's baseball team, their pitcher is the best in the league. Premise 2, their catcher is the best in the league. Premise number 3, their shortstop is the best in the league. Conclusion, Aquinas's women's baseball team is the best in the league. Okay, the structure of the fallacy of composition. The premises say something about the parts, applying standard number 1, and the conclusion says something about the whole, applying standard number 2. For example, the standard of the best pitcher would be how many people are batted out, and the standard for a catcher or shortstop would have something to do with preventing somebody from stealing bases. But the standard of whether a team is the best in their league is their win-loss record, or possibly somebody would refer to the best as the one that the team that wins the championship in the league. Your critical reasoning, provide the definition of standard number 1. In this argument, there were 3 standards in the premises, and provide the definition of the standard appealed to in the conclusion. The fallacy of composition is not a matter of not having enough parts in the premises before you go to the whole. That's more likely to be the fallacy of hasty generalization, which is a fallacy of presumption, and it involves not having a good enough sample before you draw a conclusion about the whole. It's too small, it's unrepresentative, it's not random. I'll talk about that in the next class. So it's not a matter of all the team's members being mentioned in the premises as being the best in their league, and then saying all the players are the best in their league. No, I'm sorry, that the team is the best in the league. That gives you all the premises needed as far as the sample is concerned, but it could still work out that the Aquinas women's baseball team has all the best players in the league without the team being the best in the league because they don't play well together. They've got poor coaching. So there's a difference between composition and hasty generalization when they both could have statements in the premises and draw a false conclusion. But in the first case, it's because of a change in meaning. In the second case, the hasty generalization, it's because of the sampling problem. And we'll talk about that, as I said, in the next class. The fallacy of division is the reverse of the fallacy of composition as far as the structure. In the premise, a statement is made about the whole or the whole group. And in the conclusion, there's a statement made about a member of the group or members of the group or parts of the whole, but applying a different standard. Here's my example. Ford Motor Company is responsible for the deaths resulting from the placement of a gas tank in the rear in the Ford Pinto. Ford Motor Company is liable. Ford Motor Company is responsible. Therefore, the people that worked on the Ford Pinto are to blame. In the premise, the standard of liability is a legal standard. A corporation is legally liable for harm resulting from a defective product that they put out to the public, that they sold to the public. And the harm has to be a result of the defect. Whereas if we're saying some of the engineers or safety officers were to blame, that means morally to blame. And if they did everything possible in their evaluations of the safety, they applied industry-wide safety standards, we wouldn't say they're morally to blame. The critical reasoning for the fallacy of division is the same as the fallacy of composition. Provide a definition of both standards. The other three fallacies covered in the textbook are the fallacies of hypostatization, accent, and amphibole. They will not be on the test because, for example, with the fallacies of amphibole and accent, they're mainly a problem with sentence structure, not definitions. I remember a line from the American comedian Rodney Dangerfield, "Take my wife, please." Okay, so by accenting the word please, or by not saying take my wife, for example, it suggests that not that he wants you to use her as an example, but he wants you to take her away from him. Okay, so the critical reasoning for the fallacies of amphibole and accent are state the intended meaning and then state the unintended meaning. I am not covering the fallacy of hypostatization in the exam because I believe that the fallacy of hypostatization, which is defined as taking an abstract term and giving it concrete meaning, is a fallacy. So, for example, the book gives examples such as don't worry about not having sufficient food for next year because nature takes care of its members. Nature doesn't take care of you to the extent that it provides everything you possibly need to survive. So that's an example of the book's approach to hypostatization. From my point of view, we often use abstract terms. Beauty in a way that gives them concrete meaning. Beauty is only skin deep. But if that's translated into a different statement, such as a person's true beauty lies within their character, what's inside their soul, then it's not a fallacious statement. Or the statement might makes right, might meaning power. Well, how can might do something like make right? What that really had referred to is a powerful group or nation can use that power, and whatever ensues as a result of their power is justified. Okay, so that is it as far as the fallacies of equivocation, composition, and division, as well as how language can affect argument.